A eulogy, by definition, is praise. I was thinking it would be like a timeline. And so what I've done is a praise for my mother, our mother, and also timeline of these 3 or 4 lives she lived in this body she had. As my niece, my mom's granddaughter, and I went over to my mom's house in this process of her passing away, leaving her body, we were going through some of her things, and I've seen all this before, but it's bringing a lot of things back to your mind, like, oh my God, it seems like that was 100 years ago. And I was looking at different pictures of my mom when she was a little girl. I mean, there was a point just a few years ago I realized my mother was actually born. And because I met her, she was 32 when I was born, but I never thought she was ever a baby or anything. You know? That's kind of an interesting thing to come to you. So we're going through these different things, and I'm looking at that. She was born in a family of pioneers down in Homestead. They homesteaded there in 1902 in Homestead, Florida. There was nothing to Miami. Miami was dirt roads and wood buildings. There was no South Miami or Cutler Ridge or Kendall, any of that. And there was this little train depots, and that's how these cities sprung up. And that's when my grandfather was working for Henry Flagler on the railroad, and they ended up in Homestead. And they homesteaded about 20 or so acres. And I do have to say one thing. I have 3 older brothers here. This is my version of the story. And I said they can make their comments later. What an interesting life. I was looking at that thinking, my God. She had that life of her mom and dad and 4 older sisters. My mother was the youngest of 5 girls, which, when you think of that, think of my poor grandfather out there, a pioneer, thinking, hopefully we're going to have a boy. Hopefully we're going to have a boy, 5 girls. But they were involved in farming, and these girls would help out in that, and that was a whole phase of life I didn't know, but I'd heard about because her mother lived with us a lot of the time when we were growing up. And then, of course, there was another phase, her going through school, getting through high school, married my father. It was 1938. She married my father. Now, figure this out. She really didn't venture very far because he lived right down the road. She grew up on Farm Life Road. He lived probably a quarter of a mile south of where this house was that my grandparents homesteaded in and married my dad. He had a thriving fruit business where they shipped fruit all over the country, what they call fancy fruit, these baskets and things they would do, and she was actually working for him there, and he kept saying, I'm going to marry. She loved telling this story, and she would ignore him, and he said, no, I'm going to marry you. So she was talking to her sisters one day, and she says, this old man that I work for keeps saying he's going to marry me, so I think I am. I think I'll marry him. So the next time he asked, she said, okay, and they got married. Exactly a year later, her firstborn, John, that's here, was born, and just excited and all that, and then the rest of the children came along. So now there's that phase of the life of these children coming along and raising those children. Then my father died, and that was about 1949, and here comes another phase. It's like, what is she going to do? There was no welfare at that time. How is she going to raise these kids? The good things were that the house was paid for that we lived in, so there was no mortgage or anything, but there's really no money. Most of the people that came to the funeral gave money because they knew this was going to be a difficult thing, how she's going to raise these kids. So knowing, a lot of the things you hear, she was independent, she was strong, all of these different comments about her are totally true. She was, because she was a person that's going to make it happen. So she proved it. I grew up around that, seeing somebody that can make it happen. She raised these kids, never a complaint about her lot in life, ever. Very seldom I ever saw a tear. It's just a matter of, that's life, let's get on with things. And so then there was that phase of her life, raising these kids, and actually I think that was the happiest part of her life. That gave her her mission. And there was a phase then when we were all leaving the house that I think she had a problem with that. You know, now what is she going to do? And had several jobs. I am going to go back a little bit. When my father died, and what is she going to do? It was really a family kind of atmosphere in Homestead. People really loved each other and cared about them and what can we do to help, that kind of thing. Figure there were telephones, but you know, not much other communication. So her first job was driving a school bus in the morning and in the afternoon, and then at the middle of the day worked in the school cafeteria, and that's how she started out. It was right down the street from us. And she apparently made enough money to get food on the table. And I can also remember this story that's supposed to make me feel guilty. Is my two oldest brothers were very young, and they worked at a golf course not far from our house. And they would take that money that they made. This is the story I've heard. They would take that money they made, and we could all go to the movies together because we didn't have much money. Now, that's pretty touchy. So, she did that, provided for us. Then, because of her independence, she thought she could do better, and she had a little money. And she opened a restaurant. And I probably was about 5 or 6 years old. And this was called a Flamingo restaurant. I completely forgot about this until my niece, my mom's granddaughter, was going through pictures, and they kept saying, "What is this Flamingo thing?" And I said, "Flamingo." And I said, "Oh my God, that is a restaurant your grandmother had." And that was some of my first lessons in discipline from my mom. My mother never whipped me or anything. She tried to once, it could catch me. But it was my first lesson of discipline because, figure, I got these 3 older brothers there, and they're getting into things and stuff, John, Jim, and Jerry. And I think Donald Scott was there, and they had stole some cigarettes out of the restaurant, and they're out there smoking. Now, this may be mixed up because this didn't happen to me. It seems like Jim was smoking the cigarettes, was up in the tree, got dizzy, and fell out. Is that true? It's not true? Okay, what happened?
John was the one that fell off.
Okay, John. I knew somebody fell out of the tree.
You got the concussion?
Yeah. Oh, that's what
I thought
happened.
you wrote me into something.
Yeah, so John, our cousin, fell out. Yeah, now, here's the other thing. Now, the discipline for me was, we figured, you know, well, that's good, they're stealing cigarettes. Now they steal a few of these. You know how they had those glass cases in there and had things? Well, she sold some cigars, too. So they swiped some cigars out of there, and I was just with them. I was probably 6 or 7. And so we are going out, because there was a big park next to this restaurant. And we're out there, and they're lighting up the cigars, so I light up one, my mom's smoking. Well, guess who shows up is my mother. You know what she did? She said, "Okay, young man," and takes me into the restaurant. And there was little stools on the counter besides the tables. Sat me there, and she says, "Now smoke the rest of it." And I sat there and smoked the rest of that cigar. And I guess that's why I don't smoke cigarettes. So there was that thing of this restaurant. She had that for a few years. She went from there, she started working in the county hospital, Kendall Hospital. It was in the South Miami area. It was a county hospital where indigents and that sort went. And she worked there for several years and loved it. And it turned out that a good friend of mine here, his mother worked there too, and we figured they must have known each other. You know, back in those days, he was from Miami. That was kind of interesting. I just found that out the other day. Then from there, she had met this real crazy, wild, competent doctor that lived out in a country where we did. He had a practice in Prime. And she became his nurse and everything in his office. It was the only person there. And I remember going to work with her, and I could sit around and watch things going on. And just working, making things happen and stuff. Just as kind of a side note, I've told people, I remember that, how odd it was. That was probably about 1958 or 9 or something, is there were 2 waiting rooms. You go in, this said white, this one said colored. It doesn't even seem real, that can be real, but it was. And the 2 never mixed, but they'd go into the same operating room. That seemed odd to me. So she worked there several years. Then she started working at a place called Comfort Lodge. It was a old folks home. And because she really had a desire, she wanted to have her nursing degree and that kind of stuff. So she worked there, she loved it. She worked, way over the regular hours and things. And also at the same time did babysitting and stuff because there was never enough money for things. But did that kind of stuff for several years. Then went to nursing school in 1964 and became a legitimate nurse, and also became a nursing home administrator. Got her thing from college for that, which when you think, she was probably about 50 years old when she did that. She was never going to rest or sit back and say, I've done enough, somebody needs to take care of me. She would have hated that. So then did that, and then she did that for several years, and then in the 70s, that man died, and she said she didn't know what was going to happen to that place. And I said, well, you could run it. You've been running it. So she did that for about a year, and then I started the place with her in Homestead. And that was pretty interesting, and built it up, and on and on and on. And while she was there, she decided to run for city council. And we didn't know anything about politics, but I knew quite a few people in town. So we started talking, you could probably do that, and did it. And she lost by 100 votes, but they just couldn't believe how close she came to winning this unknown person. So she did that. That's why I'm doing this. You just have to hear all these things this woman did. So now, she's probably 65 or 66 when we sold that, and Gil and I had moved up here. And she came up and loved it, so she decided she was going to move up in 1984. So you would think most people would retire by then. So she moves up here, builds a house. First time she ever had a new home with central air conditioning. She moved up here. And called me one day in my office. Now, my mother really wasn't financially oriented to things, because my brother Jim used to talk about she had these bills that she couldn't pay. And how we would think, well, what am I going to do? You know what she did with them? She threw them in the trash. Somehow it worked out. Maybe that is a new thing. Maybe just put things in the trash and things work out. So she's up here for probably a year or so, and she's getting antsy. Let's say she's 66 or whatever, 68. She decides to get a real. She calls me in the office one day and she says, what would you think if I got my real estate license? I said, oh, that'd be fantastic. I figured that'd keep her so busy. She had no time to worry about what she's going to do. So she did that for several years. Here, see all these phases and things? Then she got tired of that because she says put too many miles on her car. And, all those things that go on with real estate. And then decided to work part-time at the Titusville nursing home. She was still a nurse. Do you know that she worked there until she was 80? She didn't have to, but she did it. And that was true, the thing that Pat had read. She loved old people. She had a way with, it may not have seemed gentle when you saw it, but she had a way of taking care of them, Yeah, exactly. Well, I remember plenty of things, just like these men would be in there. They'd want to take a bath. She'd say, I'll tell you one thing. You can either get in there by yourself, or I'll get in there with you. And she would. And then she'd get in there in the shower with them. So she retired at 80. She was doing art, did some beautiful artwork, scenes and stuff like that, and did one of her granddaughters. Then that wasn't enough. In her 80s, learned how to play duplicate bridge. And, just amazing, never wanting to give up. What an example, to all of us about, oh, I'm going to retire, life of leisure. I'm never interested in that. She always liked being productive, and I'm happy about that. That's what I wanted to do. A lot of you don't know that about my mom. And so she did lead an incredible 3 or 4 lives in that body. I'm happy about that. I'm happy about the fact that I was with her when she left her body. It was beautiful. And I'm thankful that she never lost her independence. It was great. Thank you for coming.
Happy